going, baby? How you living? How you living?
I really like to take this challenge for myself, aside of just being a musician.
She had a swishy jacket and some thing on her head.
It's really big for you.
Yeah, it's like the size of me.
Don't worry, I won't say anything stupid. I hope. It's just like a crazy metal band, like shooting everything up.
My advice is forget the movies and look for a good job.
My daughter is going to sleep, so I needed to say goodnight to her.
I don't want terrible things to always be happening to me and my children.
I think I was more nervous when the movie was premiering and coming out, because then I realized that people actually had to see it.
Nice to escape the studio. We have the beautiful, sunny, not sunny English countryside behind us. So.
This country and this world can do a whole lot better.
Wow, what a presentation.
Right, like I want people to know that you didn't just show up now.
That's where the idea of the pancake came from.
But you're the only person ever who's ever asked me that question. Ever.
Oh, wow.
I got something for you.
Yes, sir.
I don't know why they still scribe. That can't bother me for ages.
Thank you.
I know what you do, Cole.
Whatever you do. I'm cool, man. I think you got some wrong information.
You got a lot on your mind, I know. It true your mom is back? Phew.
Well, I'm working with some boys. We're gonna start our own operation.
You don't want to mess with junk, man.
Yeah, I need a place to cook. I was thinking about that old church of yours.
Not in our land, Terry. That's not gonna happen.
That boy better shut his mouth. I'll return to the house I left, swept clean and in right order.
Matthew 12:44. This town is small. It already has its ways.
Your friends are quite the entrepreneurs. I've always appreciated our little arrangement.
We aren't the same.
Go find your pal.
Hey, spring, remember.
How much longer do you think we got this in us? I get caught with anything, and I'm done.
Do you understand what Everett is capable of?
It wasn't supposed to be like this. When it breaks down and stakes get high, see the beauty in all the fading.
You gotta find a way to end this.
I know.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm Mark Sugiyama from Eclectic Arts based here in Seattle, Washington. And thank you so much for joining me on this Wednesday, the 4th of August, 2021. And real quick housekeeping mention is that tomorrow I have another live stream at 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time with Mulan Fu, who has been doing a lot of directing, writing, animating, composing. So I'll be talking with her tomorrow at 4 p.m. And if you want to know more about what's going on with Eclectic Arts, please follow me as Eclectic Arts Media, one word, on Instagram. That's where I post everything first. And then some of that information migrates over to other social media platforms. If this is your first time joining me on my YouTube channel, if you could hit the subscribe button, I greatly appreciate that. And if you're on the Twitch side of things, if you could follow me over there, I greatly appreciate that as well. Okay, my guest today is a fantastic filmmaker and artist. His latest film, The Evening Hour, is available through the Seattle International Film Festival channel right now. It's also playing at the IFC Center in New York, and it's going to be premiering in Los Angeles this Friday the 6th. Please welcome to the Eclectic Arts virtual studio, Mr. Braden King.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me.
Hi, Braden, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's a busy time and an exciting time, and I really appreciate having the opportunity to be here and to talk to you about The Evening Hour.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. And yeah, you're absolutely right. With being in the theater at the IFC Center, and then like you were mentioning, you're getting ready to travel to LA for Friday and all the things going on over the weekend. This has got to be just kind of what you live for, that the film's out, being in front of an audience. And so how are you feeling about things right now?
Well, there's a almost funny, I don't know, almost like Rip Van Winkle aspect to the experience this time around, given that we premiered at Sundance in January of 2020, and then we all had the last year and a half that we all had with COVID and doing virtual festivals and things like that, which was strange and new. But to finally be emerging on the other side of that and have the opportunity for the film to show on these screens it's really been a dream. It's, we feel very, very lucky.
Yeah, I've during this time, during the last 15 months or so, is that when I started covering film and doing film festivals. So I've been on the other side of it. I haven't had a chance to be in a theater with other fans and media people watching films yet. So I can only imagine what that's like to actually take something in, with a bunch of the emotional weight and everything else that happens when you're around other people, instead of being in your home watching things. So
I mean, I think the Q&A we did last night, I was sort of talking about the fact that it feels very, again, fortunate to be able to share the film, sort of on behalf of the entire team. It feels very fortunate to share the film and all the detail we tried to capture in Kentucky, and the detail that we put into the craft of the film, and everything from the images to the sound design in the way it was supposed to be seen. For a while there, we didn't know if that was going to be possible. And then, for us filmmakers, these films aren't done until people watch them. And so in a way, these audiences are completing the movie at long last after all this time. And that also gives a huge burst of energy. And for me, I guess to circle back to what I was trying to say a second ago, personally, given all the detail that goes into these films, the way we work on them, to be able to have people have the true experiences we intended it in the theater versus on a computer or on a link, as wonderful as it is, that we can all watch things that way. I'm always, going to be married to that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's extreme, just like seeing concerts, being around, seeing a band on a stage with fans and everything. And that's what I was doing prior to COVID. So I'm looking forward to finally being in the photo pit again and being able to have that whole experience.
Yeah, great.
Watching live streams. But with this film, one thing I'm always just amazed. I've had the pleasure of talking to quite a few filmmakers in the last 15 months that with a film like yours, there's times when I was watching it where I'm like, it almost feels like it's real, and that's not fictional. And that line definitely gets blurred at times, which is really a testament to you and your team. And I'm just as a fan of film in general, how do you achieve something like that, where it gets to a point where it's so authentic that you kind of forget that you're watching a fictional film?
Well, first of all, it's gratifying. The comments very gratifying to hear, and is in many ways a testament to the focus and attention that you gave the movie. So I really appreciate that. I come from kind of a background in photography, music, and to some extent, to great nonfiction filmmaking. Some of my earliest films were there was a very lyrical kind of documentary that was made up in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska that toured for a couple of years with live soundtrack accompaniment. And then my previous feature film here was like one of the first American features that was ever shot in Armenia, movies that starred Ben Foster. And I think part of the way I'd answer that question is that there's a part of me that really looks at the filmmaking process itself as a kind of expedition and as a sort of performative process that should have a certain amount of value in its own right. And the way that manifests and what I'm talking about is the way we sort of map the territory cinematically. I like going to places to make films that haven't had a lot of films shot in them before. We went to Harlan County, Kentucky, which was a difficult place logistically to shoot a movie, but so rich in terms of the kind of imagery and landscape we were able to capture and set this story in. And then there's a deep collaboration. When you do that, there's a sort of corresponding responsibility to get the story and the portrayal right. And, kind of on the literal factual level, but also, kind of spiritually and emotionally. And so there's a long process of getting to know the literal lay of the land, getting to know the people in the community. I mean, I started location scouting for this movie probably 2 or 3 years before we shot it. all through southeastern Kentucky and southern West Virginia. And then you kind of go through a process of like mapping the narrative onto the land. And that's an image I have a lot in my head. It's like, okay, we have this story. Let's unfold that map onto this landscape and among these people and see how interwoven we can make it with what we're discovering and putting in front of the camera.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. And so when you're talking about, spending 2 to 3 years scouting out potential locations to start filming this film, and you mentioned, getting to know the lay of the land and also the people and the community and that type of thing, and then putting the narrative perhaps over that or with it. Was there another location besides Kentucky that was like a close second? That, well, I think this one might work out, but we went this way.
Yeah, I mean, and I want to emphasize, it's like I'm not, out there for 3 years straight looking at places, but you're going, I'll scout a little, I come back, I work on the script with Elizabeth Palmore, that informs things, the adaptation, then you go back, and it's kind of like the land and the locations it's almost like you can't direct the land, but it's not that different from the way you collaborate with an actor. Like the land, if you listen, it'll give you input, the mountain. I mean, I don't want to sound super new agey, but it's like the mountains will talk to you, and the community certainly will talk to you. Sorry, remind me what the second part of the question.
I was just curious. I mean, as we're going through that process, like you're saying, scouting things out here and there over the last, there were 2 to 3 years before you started filming. Was there another location that was pretty close?
Oh, right. Yeah. So yes, I mean, it really, the sort of contenders came down to where we shot, which was in and around Harlan and Letcher counties in the southeastern corner of Kentucky, and perhaps best known for films like Barbara Koppel's Harlan County, USA, or perhaps some of the Apple Shop films like Stranger with a Camera was also shot like right in that region. And then I was also looking at the area around Logan, West Virginia. And there's another town there called Danville that I was very enamored with. And the decision-making process there really came down to kind of 2 things. One was this sense of collaboration with the community, and we met people like author and activist Robert Gipe, who lives in Harlan, and felt there was a young assistant named Austin Rutherford who we met early on, who worked with us. And so it's sort of like, again, part of the process is sort of listening and observing and trying to feel what the universe is telling you a little bit. And I think we felt like there were some breadcrumbs there to follow and that we felt welcomed. And then over on the West Virginia side, beautiful locations, landscape, but not quite necessarily. Like, it's like things start to either click into place or they don't. And it just kind of felt like, when you're forcing things a little bit, it's like, well, this other place is feeling pretty good. And then on the very practical level, and not less philosophically, right in the run up to shooting, West Virginia got rid of their tax incentive. And Kentucky still had theirs in place. And so that I was already leaning toward Harlan, but that was sort of like, okay, that was the real message of like, okay, now we know where we're going.
Okay, that makes sense. And how did this project come across your desk initially?
It went through a kind of very meandering and in some ways long-term development process. But in a nutshell, I'm trying to think about, I want us to not spend our entire time talking about this because it is a bit of a long story. The short version of the story, and I want to try to give a little bit of the history here. It went through some machinations, starting with the actual first person who found the book and thought this should be a movie was Michael Trotter, who ended up playing Reese in the film. And at the time, he wasn't necessarily thinking of it as like, oh, this is something I want to act in or do, but it literally was just moved by, this thing moved me. I found this thing and I should figure out how to turn it into a movie. And he had no idea how to do that, but sent it to some friends of his named Tim and Trevor White, who have gone on to develop films like The Post and some of the other names are escaping me right now. There's a great film that took place on sort of like I want to say an Indian reservation up in the Arctic. Wind River, is that the right movie? and Tim and Trevor kind of developed this film and got a first draft together along with screenwriter Elizabeth Palmore. And at that point, another producer named Tom Scapars, who knew my film here, sent me the book, and I read it and fell in love with it pretty immediately. It had the landscape, it had the opportunity for everything we've discussed so far. And then there was kind of maybe a 1.5 year long process of working with Elizabeth to continue developing the script and kind of intermittently meeting Michael. But, again, I want to emphasize, it wasn't like, hey, I found this thing and I want to act in it. It was sort of like a very long circle to getting to know him, putting the other pieces together, and suddenly the light bulb going off. It was kind of beautiful because in a way, he played the character who is the most responsible for sort of helping Cole become who he is and realize who he is, and acts as kind of mirror for that. And I felt like in real life, Michael kind of played that role for Carter's book. And there's a longer version of this story that involves audition, and then finally not being able to beat him, and he just did a remarkable job in the movie, and it felt like the right way to go.
Okay, yeah, I'm always, again, so amazed when I hear the stories of like all the different pieces and the timeline for any film about how long it's taken. And instead of, and most people know, it's not just 2 hours when you're in the theater and watching, and then it took only like a few days. We know it's longer than that, but sometimes you hear like 4, 5, 6 years sometimes, depending on when things first started.
Oh yeah,
it's like, oh my gosh.
It's a miracle that when you look back at everything that has to come in place for these things to happen, it's a miracle that any of them come together. You're like threading a needle from like the backyard of the house behind you, trying to get these things to go. So it's always a miracle, I think, when they come together.
Wow. Okay. And one thing, as we were kind of talking about authenticity with the film and everything, did you find like local background folks, citizens from Harlan that were in the background of the film? Because again, there's all these pieces that seem like that you must have just really reached out into the community, is my guess.
We did, yeah. So we did a big open call. I think we had about 300 or 400 people show up for an open call we did at the local mall. And then we brought a really great photographer named Alex Gillespie, who's just an excellent kind of street photographer, very good at meeting people. Isn't necessarily like a background casting guy for movies, but has a killer eye and is really great at talking to people and meeting them and just kind of turn them loose. And he would come back at the end of the day every day with like a whole set of photos for me and stories about different people he'd met, and then we bring those people in. And it was kind of a great twofold process, because not only was I kind of going through casting those background roles, but I would learn from these people about the community and about what we were making, and learn more about how to, again, weave in a little more authenticity every time. And a similar process happened when we were location scouting. Like, there's a number of characters you see in the film that sort of came with the locations we found, there's some of the people sitting, not Tiny and Lottie necessarily, but some of the people sitting on those porches, live in those houses. And it's all about, I just love that. I love the process so much, and the way it enables you to be in the world, and the kind of the people it allows you to meet, and the experiences it allows you to have. And so all that to me is sort of part of starting to kind of braid the rope of the film together as you're going, and trying to always be open to what the universe is presenting you with that might be gold for your story.
Wow. Okay.
And I should actually say gold for your experience as well, because something you're alluding to is something that's very important to me, which is kind of trying to allow the viewer to spend a little bit of their own time in the world that the characters are living in. So that goes back to my comments earlier about this idea of almost like a cinematic mapping expedition. Like, we're telling a story, but we're also trying to create a world that the audience can sort of spend time in. And, this gets a little into the weeds, but at moments throughout the evening hour, like the frame of the film and the frame of the screen wanders away from our characters, momentarily, and kind of lets you have a little breath and lets you take a little walk away from them before we come back to the next chapter of the story.
Interesting. Yeah, now I'm starting to flashback to certain scenes in the film where you might be, the camera might go back to the folks on the porch, even though Cole's inside the house doing something.
Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah, I love hearing these kind of behind the scenes things.
Yeah, sure.
Now I got to rewatch it again. But and so how did the role of Cole, for people that haven't seen the film yet, who's the central character in this film, how did Philip prepare for this? I mean, there's so many facets of what he has to work with to get across through his character in this film.
Gosh, I mean, I wish I could speak for him. What I can tell you is that we looked, along with Alison Estrin, the casting director on the film, who became a very deep collaborator for me and a close friend. We looked at a lot of actors for all these roles. And the sort of thesis we were working under was that and the theme is developing in this conversation, but was that I wanted to try to find actors that, to the extent possible, we could kind of weave into that landscape. And I think there's a different version of the ensemble that maybe would be popped out a little more. But we, in the process of trying to find them, Allison had been a big fan of Phil's. We met. I usually like to, especially if I can look at work and things like that, kind of meeting and getting to know somebody in some ways is almost more important than the audition, because you're embarking on a collaboration. You want to kind of understand how you can work together. And with a certain caliber of actor, I think you kind of can be pretty, you can sort of rest assured that they can do it. It's not a question of like, do they have the chops? It's like, how are you going to collaborate to turn over all the stones? And so Phil and I had a good meeting, and I was sort of trying to make my final decision, and Allison really encouraged me to have him come in and read. And he came in, and we sort of started doing an audition in about 30 seconds, I think, into the first scene we were doing together. It was like, internally, I was like, okay, this is done. Like, this guy's, he's bringing so much. And I just think that Phil, he did a beautiful interview with Carlos Aguilar that's up on RogerEbert.com about the process of working on this film. And I think he's very comfortable kind of living in the unknown. Like, I think so much of what we were doing, both collaboratively, but in terms of these characters in the film, was kind of being okay with sitting in, like, I don't know, not black and white emotions, or like all these characters have good and bad in them, and they're flawed in different ways, and no one's like all good or all bad. And I think Phil was someone who was very comfortable kind of like exploring certain kinds of ambiguity, certain kinds of male emotion and tenderness, frankly, that I think is very rare in a leading male actor. And in some ways he kind of brought his whole life and being to this character. I think that was my sense, and he could probably speak a lot more deeply as to what he did in terms of his preparation process. But that was my experience of what he brought when he showed up to start making the movie together.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and you definitely touched on a point with this film with the character of Cole about masculinity, because it is something that's pretty rarely shown, especially perhaps if you look at a rural setting, maybe some of the stereotypes that might be coming through, that there's definitely scenes where I thought it was going to go one way and it completely went a totally different way. Which
Right.
I really, really love that fact that it wasn't predictable at all in terms of how he approached the character, the kind of direction you gave him, and where those scenes went, which I think just kind of sucked me in that much more into their world and what was going on.
That's great. I mean, it all started with Carter's book, and Carter's book was very sensitive and kind of rendered a very complex and nuanced portrait of a region that I think is dealt with quite reductively often. And the characters were just so much more human and complex and beautiful and flawed than anything I feel like I'd seen, and specifically seen done in Appalachia, that I was in from that first read. And I think that Carter did an amazing job, and Elizabeth did an incredible job of interpreting Carter's novel, of really exploring kind of a spectrum of male emotion and intimacy and friendships that felt very unique to me, that I felt like I hadn't seen in a movie before. There's a whole spectrum of the way that the men in the film interact, and the friendships that they have, and the histories that they have, and the kind of like, what is really in many ways kind of a love story between Cole and Terry. I think there's it's a story of someone having their heart broken, and both literally and metaphorically.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you can throw in, the other layers between Cole and his estranged mother, the opioid crisis going on in the town and in that area, which is very, very true anywhere in the world now, that people can hopefully relate to. I know I can right here in Edmonds, Washington, that we have here. I'm curious too, when I've had a chance to talk to directors specifically, a lot of times they'll talk about, the whole journey, like you've just mentioned, for the last 24 minutes, from the beginning of just getting this project on, I don't know, across your desk or the book or what have you, all the way to, seeing it with an audience like you've had the chance to do. Is there anything you would change?
Oh gosh. It might be too early for me to answer that. I mean, I think, there's sort of almost a cliche where you finish directing the film or you finish making the movie, and you learn how to make the movie while you're making it. And so, you finish, and then it's like, oh, okay, I know how to do this now. Let's do it again. And, there's this, I don't think any director out there who's self-aware in any way doesn't feel like they could have done it better by the time they get to the end. Everything is a process of discovery and refinement, and hopefully, the healthiest way to deal with that is to put it into the next thing. So, I will say this, sitting in the film on Friday night, watching it with an audience for the first time in, I think, 18 months or close to it, I felt pretty satisfied with what we'd made. And that's not always the case. I sat back there. I wasn't planning on watching the film. I was a little nervous and thought I might go out and just go for a walk or maybe get a glass of wine or something. And then did the intro. There's a seat open in the back row. I kind of sat down. I thought, well, I'll just watch a couple minutes. And then I ended up staying for the whole thing. And I kind of sat back and thought, I feel pretty good about this. It felt like it had held up over all that time for me.
Well, that's great to hear, and you're right. I think every artistic person, when they'll finish something, kind of like, well, I think there's maybe something I could have done. But at the same time, if they were just kind of taking it in for what it is, if they can enjoy some level of it, that's really a success. Because I think sometimes we're our worst critics of like,
sure.
Yeah, you look at that scene or look at that edit. Or if I only had more time to redo that, or if the sun didn't drop at that time, the light got kind of messed up or whatever. But it's like, if you can sit there and just kind of take it in, like, yeah, I'm really kind of enjoying this, and the audience is enjoying it, then it's like, okay, this is, like you said, this is that last piece of the puzzle that I finally have in place of seeing it with an audience.
Well, another thing I can tell you that I've learned that alleviates some of those feelings is fighting for those moments that you just described along the way. Like, some of the most painful moments are realizing, like, that thing you just said, I should have fought for this. We should have gotten the light for that. And it's not always easy. I think, as directors, we're constantly being asked, I almost want a t-shirt that says, like, can we just, like, all day long, people are coming up to you and going, can we just X? Can we just Y? Can we just, and your job in a way, and it's a difficult thing to get comfortable with, but like, your job is to be difficult, if you follow what I'm saying, not for its own sake, and I'm definitely not into, disrespecting people or wanting to be a tyrant on set. But what I mean is, like, you're the last person with your finger in the dike of the dam, trying to protect the baby. And if you don't do it, no one else is going to do it. Because everybody, I think we were very fortunate that we had a very invested cast and crew. And I don't want to, people love the movie and they gave their whole hearts to it. But you have to get very comfortable as a director with saying, no, we can't just do that. We have to do this, and this is why. And if in the moment it can be difficult, but it leads to moments like the one I just described, where you're much more at peace with those decisions later. Like, thank God I was difficult about that, because that was the right thing to do.
Okay, yeah, and again, for people out there, these are those things that I love hearing about, that whole process of making a film, especially as a director. Things that maybe the average person doesn't think about. They're just saying, well, entertain me. Let's see what happens. And it's like, there's a lot of work that went into what you just said, saw as a finished product. So, Braden, to kind of wrap this up, can you talk about what's coming up here on Friday down in Los Angeles?
Sure. So we open in Los Angeles at the Lemley Monica Film Center in Santa Monica. And we're going to be doing a series of Q&As for different screenings. Friday night is sold out. The great Lynette Howell Taylor has produced movies like A Star Is Born and Half Nelson, and One of my favorite films she's done was a little movie called On the Ice, but has had an incredible career and has been a great friend and supporter. Is going to run the Q&A for that, and we'll have Phil Ettinger and Ross Partridge, screenwriter Elizabeth Halmore, myself, but unfortunately or unfortunately, that screening sold out. Saturday night, Ted Hope is going to run the Q&A, iconic indie film producer and until recently Amazon executive. He's responsible for a lot of really great films getting made the last few years, and that'll have a similar group of people. One of the soundtrack musicians, William Tyler, is going to be there. Philip Ettinger and Ross Partridge again, and screenwriter Elizabeth Palmore. And then for the Sunday matinee, I think this is going to be a really special screening. Screenwriter Howard Rodman, and one-time president of the WGA and USC professor Howard Rodman, is going to do an intimate Q&A with myself and Tess Harper, who's sort of coming out for a rare public appearance and to talk about the film and her career. So that's the Sunday matinee and all of this is at the Laemmle Film Center in Santa Monica, California.
Wow, that sounds amazing. You've got some amazing screenings and panels and Q&As coming up. Yeah, it's starting on Friday. So, Braden, thank you so much for taking the time and for making this film. I think it's tremendous. And for everybody else out there, when you're done watching this live stream, if you don't have a chance to get to Santa Monica or to New York, you can go online to watch it to the Seattle International Film Festival right now. I'm up here in Seattle. And if you're like me, maybe you'll watch it more than once. You can pick up all the other details that Braden just talked about. So.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mark. It was a real pleasure talking to you. And my one request for anybody watching online or at home is just please get in front of the biggest screen you can and turn it up a little bit.
I agree, Braden. Thank you so much, sir.
It was a real pleasure. Thanks for your interest in the film and for having me on to talk today. It was really, really a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.